You will find this fascinating, as I did.
All right, let's see it.
The founders of the country cited Deuteronomy more than any other religious or secular work. That's how much this book influenced the creation of the freest country ever made.
So there's a lot to unpack here, but to begin, this claim comes from the research of Donald Lutz, which was published in the 1980s, namely this paper and this book. And Lutz surveyed all the political publications he could find by Americans, not just the Founding Fathers, any Americans between 1760 and 1805. Lutz found that a full 34% of all of the quotations of any kind across that corpus came from the Bible. Deuteronomy was quoted more than any other book. Montesquieu's The Spirit of the Laws was second place. However, we should point out that a full 3/4 of all of the quotations from the Bible came from reprinted sermons, not from publications directly from the Founding Fathers. If you remove the reprinted sermons and include only what Lutz referred to as the secular publications, 34% drops to 9%. The Bible becomes the fourth most quoted piece of literature from that entire corpus. Additionally, Lutz points out, if you look at 1787 and 1788, the Federalists, the people responsible for the Constitution, quoted the Bible 0 total times. It's never quoted in the Federalist Papers, never quoted at the Constitutional Convention. The only quotations of the Bible that come from that time period are from the Anti-Federalists, and it only appears in 9% of their quotations. So did the Bible, did Deuteronomy have a significant impact on the actual creation of this country? Not really. But sermons that were published during this time period were very influential. However, that's not necessarily the Founding Fathers. Additionally, the 1770s, the 1780s, and the 1790s, the period of the primary framing of this nation, coincides with the period of the lowest church attendance in the history of this nation. And the Founding Fathers were not bucking that trend. These were not phenomenally religious people. There were some very religious people among them, but they were primarily concerned with Enlightenment rationalism, with classical civilization. And many of them were influenced by deism and criticized the Bible. But it was still a useful rhetorical tool. Deuteronomy was cited because it was the compendium of Moses' career as a lawgiver, and it supported their rhetoric about laws. They appealed to it as a proof text to show that what they were developing based on classical civilization was supported by the Bible. They were not being guided by the Bible as the 1787 to 1788 period demonstrates.
So I wrote a column for Fox giving 7 great insights just from the book. Do not show partiality in judgment. There is a specific law in both Exodus and Deuteronomy. It's specific. You'll love this, Dave. You cannot favor the poor man who comes into your court.
So in his Fox News article, Prager just cites Deuteronomy 1:17, which only says, do not show partiality in judgment. There is no reference to the poor in that verse. The references to not showing partiality to the poor come from Exodus 23 and Leviticus 19, where they say that in the broader context of not showing any partiality to anybody in rendering judgment.
Justice is justice. It is like a law against social justice.
It's absolutely no such thing whatsoever, because social justice is not about showing partiality to the poor in a courtroom. It's about creating a more just society in which one's income does not affect how much access they have to resources and to justice. And this is something that is repeatedly emphasized throughout the Hebrew Bible, that you should not deny justice to the poor. In fact, one of the most repeated pieces of rhetoric in the prophetic literature, what's called the prophetic critique, is precisely about how folks who grind the faces of the poor and deny justice to the poor and to the needy and to the orphan and to the widow by manipulating it, by manipulating the economy, by using their wealth to push out and marginalize the poor, are sinning, are committing abominations when they try to worship God, because their worship is tainted by their undermining of the purpose of the law, which is to create a more just and righteous society in which the poor are not marginalized and oppressed. There's no reference in Deuteronomy to not showing partiality to the poor, but what there is a commandment to forgive debts every 7 years, is a commandment to give liberally with an open hand and a glad heart to anyone who needs. There's even a commandment in there to, when you release a slave, to send them away with provisions and food and money and clothing so that they do not go away empty-handed. Something that this nation evidently forgot about, and something that I'm sure Dennis Prager does not feel bad about.
There is only justice.
It's a law against equity.
So this is profoundly biblically illiterate and fundamentally misunderstands how justice was understood anciently. Because justice was not about a response to an indiscretion. It was not about the right punishment. Justice was about producing the right social outcome, because social order and balance was seen as the foundation of cosmic order. And if it got too out of balance, if there were too many extremes in social inequality, that could rock the foundations of cosmic order, and then we would experience cosmic calamity. And this is why the legislation in the Hebrew Bible, in Deuteronomy, in Exodus, in Leviticus, recognizes and accounts for the special extenuating circumstances faced by the poor and the needy and the oppressed and the widow and the orphan. That's why there is specific legislation aimed specifically at them and at special treatment for them, because it was not about ensuring that everybody had the right punishment imposed. It was about ensuring that there was social order and social harmony. Yes, the poor were always there, but you were supposed to take care of them with allowing them to glean, for instance, with the law in Deuteronomy about forgiving debts, so that you did not produce extremes in social inequality. Neither of these men has the first clue what they are talking about when it comes to justice in the Bible.
That's sort of...
Exactly. Equity and justice are mutually exclusive. Equity and liberty are mutually exclusive. That's exactly right.
So not only does this wildly misunderstand and misrepresent biblical ideas about justice and equity, it doesn't even get right the perspectives of the founding period. The founding fathers lived in a period of the least social inequality that this nation, since it was colonized, has seen, but they still recognized the need to provide for the general welfare and ensure that there were not extremes in social inequality. Now, they had frameworks like stadialism that produced different ideas about the best ways to ensure that there were not extremes in social inequality, and these were still phenomenally wealthy and privileged men who rationalized their privilege as their natural aristocracy. So they had very different ideas from us. But this notion that equity and justice are incommensurate and mutually exclusive categories is just 100% rationalization of contemporary right-wing authoritarianism.